Depends on how the cheering goes.
Depends on the behaviour. Right.
No.
So we've opened the meeting, so I'll move the acceptance of the apologies from
Happy to second.
Councillor Fletcher, Casey, Mr Honeck and Mr Taper and Wilcox for lateness, and Councillor Cooper for early departure at 2 o'clock. We'll be all over by then, of course. So moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Walker, and sorry.
And Penny Hulse and Alf have just texted to say they just left a meeting, so they'll be late.
Okay, so lateness for Councillor Hulse and Councillor Filipino. All those in favour?
Aye.
Declarations of interest. We have 2 declarations of interest over item 14 on the disposals report, and that relates to the Manukau Vodafone Hotel site, and that's Mayor Goff and Councillor Walker, John Walker that is. So those have been noted.
Oh, Mr Chairman, because I know members of the Second Nature Trust personally, I think it's appropriate for me to withdraw from the meeting for that discussion, and that's what I intend to do.
Okay. Do the same. Yep. Thank you, John. Confirmation of the minutes. Could someone please move? Councillor Walker, Councillor Darby seconded. All those in favour?
Aye.
There are no petitions. There's no public input. 2 local boards wishing to present. We have Angela representing the Manurewa Local Board, and she wants to talk on the 770R Great South Road, Manukau
Should probably withdraw for this too.
property. Welcome, Angela.
Thank you, Councillor Clough, and good morning, councillors. I am here to speak to the disposal of part of the reserve land at 770 Great South Road, Wiri, and it's found in item 14, page 101 of your published agenda. Just want to give a bit of background and just a few comments. The request for the reserve revocation and approval of the sale of land came to my board's business meeting in December 2016. You'll note in attachment A on page 106.6, my board endorsed the revocation but requested that I come and speak with the governing body prior to it coming to the Finance and Performance Committee meeting for your final decision on the sale. Councillor Newman and I met with Councillor Clough and Councillor Simpson on the 8th of February, and the Chair and the Deputy of this committee were very helpful. And they undertook to speak with Panuku to clarify the substantive question from my board, which was, why was Panuku not selling the land directly to Safari Group, the developer of the proposed Ramada Hotel to be built on the land, but instead we're selling it to Second Nature Charitable Trust, the lessee of the land, who would then on-sell it to Safari Group. So I was pretty comfortable that the due diligence would progress and the item would proceed through this Finance and Performance meeting or committee. However, it did appear back on my agenda again this month to affirm my board's approval on the sale, as well as the revocation of the reserve status. So I wanted to come here today just to provide you with a background of the resolutions that have come from my board. They should be tabled. Do you all have a copy of them? Mm-hmm. So the context for my presentation to you today is in terms of good governance and transparency. And it's directed between the relationship of my board and the quality of advice we're receiving from Auckland Council. I just want to state that there is no desire from my board to prevent the residential growth, consequential infrastructure and employment for Manukau, Manurewa and Wiri that this development has proposed to deliver. And there is every will by my board to assist in reaching the $69 million target by selling non-strategic assets. Although I dispute that this piece of land is a non-strategic asset, it's a separate issue. So we take our governance role seriously, and for that a number of, for the sake of transparency, resolutions were put to this item, and that's what I want to just clarify for you. Because as a chair, I find it an unacceptable position for my board to be in. To begin with, why the land sale by Panuku is to Second Nature Charitable Trust and not directly to Safari Group. The reason is given in point 5 on page 101 of item 14. Second Nature Charitable Trust holds a 99-year lease on the land. And in an effort to discover the details of the lease agreement, which I thought was quite sensible and pragmatic given that we're talking about the sale of council asset, I asked for a copy of the lease. Auckland Council didn't have a copy. I asked Panuku for a copy as their board had endorsed the disposal process and they didn't have a copy either. So I asked Regional Facilities Auckland, as they are a funder of Second Nature Charitable Trust to the tune of $350,000 per annum towards the operational cost of the Vodafone Event Centre. They didn't have it either. I finally received a copy of the lease instrument directly from Richard Jeffrey, CEO of Vodafone Event Centre, and it was the original lease in the name of Counties Manukau Pacific Trust, which was the previous name of the trust. So my first question to you, Councillor Clow, is how can an endorsement for the sale of land, ratepayers' land, be recommended by Auckland Council to the Panuku Board when nobody had the lease instrument over this council-owned asset? How do we know the Trust is delivering on its objectives held in the third schedule on page 25 of that lease instrument? How could we be sure of the sale of the land conditions under this lease instrument and that the sale meets the objectives of the third schedule? It is true, the land cannot be sold unless Second Nature Charitable Trust relinquishes the lease on the land, which they're going to do, so they can purchase it. I have asked officers from Panuku if they had explored other options for the land sale. They hadn't, and when questioned why, their response was, Auckland Council instructed them to only progress the proposal from Second Nature Charitable Trust. So my second question to you, Councillor Clow, who in Auckland Council gave the instruction to only look at the one proposal and not explore alternative options? This is important. As you will note in point 8 on page 102, the report states that no alternative services have been identified. So one would assume that is because none were investigated. One could also assume that is because the lease determined that there was no option to explore other possibilities for the sale of the land, such as Panuku selling it directly to Safari Group or directly to the market in an open and transparent sale. Another important point to note is that the Trust does not have the first right of refusal under the lease instrument. So it's of some concern that the lessee, who is on peppercorn rent for multiple commercial ventures taking place on the land, and given the tenure of not just the lease, but the tenure of the relationships, that we did not experience a richer discussion over lifting the lease on the land for a transparent market sale. It's been a bit like pulling teeth to discover the barrier, and I think the next piece helps to clarify it a bit. So far, we have an endorsement to proceed with the disposal process of land by Panuku from instruction by Auckland Council only on the proposal of Second Nature Charitable Trust. We then learn in point 6 on page 101 of your agenda that Second Nature Charitable Trust last year signed a conditional contract with Safari Group for the sale of the land to them on which they will build the Ramada Hotel and Apartments. The Trust undertook their own procurement process without consultation with Panuku, Auckland Council or the local board. Last week, my board received the resource consent for the Ramada Hotel and Apartment Complex. It had been to the Urban Design Panel in November, which brings me to timeframes. The other two land sale items on this report have been going for an average of a year, and most land sales that I have been involved in have taken about a year. Disposals take about a year. This one took a couple of months. It's not unlike the Whitewater Rafting Project by the same trust that made it into the previous LTP in the 11th hour. It's relationships. In the past weeks, the media have been vigilant in reporting on flipping of real estate, and my board holds concerns that this will be the case for the sale of council land from the Trust to Safari Group. And unfounded or not, the concerns are real. The public will perceive any uplift from the sale as a flipping of a council asset. So in summary, the parts of the story on their own will no doubt all hold reasonable explanations. And that's why I don't really require any answers today, because I've heard enough. The sum of all of the parts of the story tell a tale of substandard transparency, governance and management, which is why your own resolutions are prefixed with, for the sake of transparency. The reserve revocation and the land sale has been endorsed by my board, and the views that I'm speaking about today are solely about good governance and transparency when dealing with a public asset, The inequity of the shortcuts must stop. I would just like to acknowledge the professionalism of Letitia and Marion from Panuku, who have been providing the best advice I can. They've represented Auckland Council and Panuku exceptionally well. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. I will take your questions as being rhetorical, because you can't ask me
you
questions,
can.
but I can ask you some. But questions, and Councillor Walker.
Yeah, do you think that, or do you consider that the council actually has some conflict of interest with itself? Given that we've got a circumstance where the council has a relationship with Second Nature Trust, so that is one relationship, and that it has other relationships, that is, it's got an obligation to look after ratepayers at large, and there are obviously parts of council that are charged with getting the best value for council. Is it conceivable that there's a conflict of interest here, and have you given some thought as to how that might be handled?
I think that the conflicts are real or perceived, and we've had 2 conflicts identified today. I think that the best possible outcomes are trying to be delivered on that piece of land. I'm not quite sure who for. It's a difficult question, Wayne. It's a challenging question. I'm not sure.
Councillor Newman.
Thank you, Angela. With respect to the deed of lease document that I have, but I'm not sure everyone else has, I'm not sure that can be provided. Are you aware in the second schedule it refers to the umbrella agreement, the agreement between the lessor and the lessee for the development of the land?
Yeah.
Are you aware that the umbrella agreement was subject to a judicial review sought by the trust to determine who was the beneficiary of the sale of the land? And, well, that's the first question. Are you aware of that it was subject to the judicial review?
Yes.
And you'll be aware that the outcome of the judicial review was that the declaratory judgment sought and given was that the beneficiary of the sale of land was actually the lessor of the land, in this case Auckland Council, which has inherited the lease.
Yes.
So the sale and purchase agreement referred to in the report, you'll note, is a sale and purchase agreement between the hotelier and the lessee, but not the lessor.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Watson.
Thank you. Thanks, Angela. You mentioned the concern with this notion of flipping. You know, we've had articles in the paper of people making big... have you been given any assurance that there isn't some sort of property flipping going to occur here? Has there been any sort of assurance given that that won't happen?
No, there has to be no assurance of that. My board held a workshop, and we were given the impression there could be uplift from the sale.
Councillor Stewart.
Oh,
Yep.
me, okay. I thought other people had their hands up before me, that's okay. Yes, I think Councillor Quicks will probably pick up on a little bit of this, but there has been a very long history with this particular trust, and it goes back way back to Sir Barry Curtis's time, when this initially, this trust started up and the event centre went in. We were told that it would not cost the ratepayers a single cent. And I tell you what, over the years, there's been a lot of money from this particular trust, and I think Councillor Quacks will go into it a little bit more, have actually had the property, that bit of land, a couple of times, and then it's been sold back. There's been quite a few strange things that have happened.
Are you asking Angela that question?
Yeah, all right. All right, so, okay. It's Angela, I'm sure you were aware, because you've been around
Been around.
the table for a wee while.
In a good way.
But, no, in a good way, that's right. But, and were you aware that I'm just trying to think, okay, so there was So far, the council's provided $52 million, this is going back in 2009, in forms of grants for this particular trust. There's been, were you aware that at one time that the trust ended up with the block of land and then there was something?
Through the chair, Councillor Stewart.
Just be a little bit careful here. We're really just talking about this revocation of the reserve status.
So I agree with you, Councillor Clow. I'm specifically here to talk about the transparency of this particular transaction. If there was anything I would ask, it would be that a review of the schedule around the objectives of the trust be looked at like most of our lease agreements are for people that community groups that we lease to, and that they are looked at in context of the original reason for the development, which was to the community, that the community benefit from all of those things that are in that schedule. The history is there. It's not what I'm here to speak about today.
Okay.
We know where you're coming from there, Councillor Stewart. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Angela, look, thank you. I think it's always important to question the information that's put in front of you and to ensure that we always get the best information available to us, and I congratulate you on that. My two questions are, first, are there any questions you now have for anybody, either at Panuku or Auckland Council, that you haven't had answers to about this?
I am curious as to who in Auckland Council did advise only to look at the one proposal.
Just be quite clear on that. I was about to clarify that. To my knowledge, and certainly to Sue's knowledge as well, is no one in Auckland Council gave that instruction to Panuku.
That's not what they told
So we sort of fall back to the quality advice given to the local board. It puts us in a difficult situation.
Right, so that, I just wanted to make sure you had all your questions answered. That's still one that I think we could potentially ask Panuku later. And the second, I just want to confirm that you are supporting the revocation of the reserve status for
Correct.
Lansdale in an open market. Is that correct?
Correct.
Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Quakes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Chairman. I guess that I'm somewhat more familiar with the history of this than most councillors here. And Councillor Newman referred to the lease document. That was, and a judicial review, was that the judicial review that was initiated by the county's Manukau Trust, the Pacific Trust, in order to clarify whether they should receive the proceeds from that sale of land next to the, which was eventually bought by Sleepyheads. Was that in order to clarify who should receive the proceeds from that sale?
Yes.
And what were the results of that judicial review?
I could answer that.
Yeah, I'm not, this isn't what I was here to talk about.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, the reason why I asked that question is I suppose we need to look into the history of what has occurred over the years, and Councillor Stewart has referred to that. And what I'm trying to determine here is from Chair Dalton is a pattern of behaviour that has occurred over the last decade or more.
Councillor Quakes, I just have to say that
Mr. Chairman, a pattern of behaviour
sorry,
could be either good
local board-
behaviour or bad behaviour.
local board chair does not want to answer that question.
And shouldn't
Made it quite clear
be.
twice now.
I'll
Are there
leave
any
it
other
for people
questions?
to draw their own conclusions in that case, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Filippone.
Morning, Angela. Angela, just two questions. If Panuku are involved in the sale and with Second Nature Trust before this gets finalised, depending on the result of the agenda item, I'll be interested in your thoughts around that. If Panuku will be involved with Second Nature Trust as per the agenda item. Just your thoughts around that?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean.
Oh,
So they're involved now?
It's in the agenda item. This is why, just with D, that Pānuku will be,
They'll
according
be
to this,
progressing
in
with
the
the
event of Pānuku Development, Auckland and the Second Nature Trust, Charitable Trust, concluding a sale and purchase agreement at full and fair market value for Auckland Council's interest in approximately in the area. So that's one of the